Hello, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to Stuart Stobie from Priority Freight. Thank you very much for joining us today, Stuart.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dave. Looking forward to the chat.
Absolute pleasure. Can you give us an overview of your business, what you do, and where it fits in the supply chain cycle, please?
Okay, I'm the Chief Commercial Officer with Priority Freight. We work mainly providing bespoke, time-critical and premium freight solutions, which in the main offer support or expedition to standard supply chains which have become distressed or under pressure or stretched over a period of time. We operate in a number of sectors that value that speed up process, aviation, the marine sector, but mainly we're predominant in the automotive sector. We're working with 22 OEMs, so 22 car manufacturers at the moment across Europe, and over 600 of their tier suppliers.
Okay, yeah. So I bet every day is quite dynamic then in that sort of environment.
Every day is very different. You don't wake up to a standard day. It just depends what's going on in the automotive sector on any particular day. So if any of the suppliers are in any type of distress, they tend to require speed up. They only carry about 4 hours stock in most production plants. That's a very lean supply chain, and often needs some support to keep it certain. And of course, production downtime in the plants or in the maintenance hangars is supremely expensive. So the cost of transport sits nicely, if you like, within the supply chain, because without having that additional premium freight support, and it's a bespoke solution every time, so it's a tailor-made solution for that situation to bring the supply chain back in order, there's particularly expensive production downtime. I saw a plant stop last week for 3 hours, and the cost was over $1 million. So it's so you need to get your suppliers right, and they need to be able to deliver on time for you.
Gosh, that is really interesting. Really interesting. I asked this question of everyone. What brought you into the lovely logistics world?
I started my career in 1984. I say 1984 because it doesn't sound quite as long ago as 41 years ago. I went to work for a global freight forwarder at Heathrow Airport on the false pretense in my mind that I'd be doing a lot of travelling, because I never travelled at all anywhere apart from to Heathrow and back. But they were a company called Emery Worldwide. They were a consolidator, forwarder. They had a great ethos, send it in and we'll get rid of it type of situation. But they really enthused me. Interesting at the time. I mean, they've been swallowed up now by a number of mergers and acquisitions over the years, but I guess I didn't really realise how big they were. They had more planes than British Airways back then, and they've disappeared off the face of the globe in 41 years. So hopefully nothing to do with me. I was only there a couple of years.
And obviously after that, obviously I know that, but not everyone will know that. Obviously you had a fantastic career with TNT and ended up being the MD of the business.
Yeah, I was with TNT for 28 years. Again, the halcyon days of transport. I think one of your questions is what development has surprised me most in the sector. I'll come to that later, but I think TNT were the forerunners of innovation in the parcels market, 30 years, 40 years ago. They were growing with extraordinary speed. Again, it was a sort of make it happen, empowered environment to work in. But what's, I guess, is most important, if I look back on it, is service was king. We weren't talking about price, we were talking about service, and they weren't positioned as the cheapest company in the market. They were probably positioned as one of the most expensive, but they delivered on their promises. And if you do that, and you're faster and more reliable than the opposition, you'll always win through at some point. So yeah, I had a great career there, really enjoyed myself, travelled globally, worked in sub-Saharan Africa, worked in the UK, worked in Europe. Great logistics experience.
Yeah, thank you. And probably, what you said about business, if you do it very well, do what you say you're going to do on the tin, and are reasonably priced, you're always going to succeed, whatever industry you're in. Well, not logistics, definitely, every industry. Please tell us about your business sector and how you see the sector developing in the next few years.
So our business sector, as I previously explained, really is the premium freight or time-critical solutions. Priority Freight's been trading for 29 years. It trades as a light asset provider of services, i.e. we don't own any of our own vehicles or planes. That model gives us the opportunity to offer speed and flexibility to our customers by going out on the market and finding the right vehicles, whether they be helicopters, planes, or standard trucks and vans, to meet the delivery criteria that's required to keep the supply chain running. As I said previously, the benefit for our customers there is that it gives them certainty of supply in their supply chain, and a very agile supply chain for them, which is important for their sectors because it keeps their cash flow fluid rather than holding too much, millions and millions of pounds worth of stock on site. But any deviation within that supply chain can potentially lead to extremely high costs with production downtime. So where we come in is we give them that certainty. We give them an opportunity to move away from their standard logistics, so their standard inbound routes, and speed those up with faster vehicles or aircraft solutions. Okay,
no, thank you. And if you was describing the current challenges in the marketplace, how would you describe them?
Look, given we're mostly in the automotive sector, the biggest challenges for us are really, economic uncertainty at the moment. I guess that's a challenge across industry and across business, but more specifically, car sales are down. Cars are a luxury. They're being priced off the road at the moment, but it's a big industrial sector for the UK, so it needs some review. You've also then got the complications of BEV, battery electric vehicles versus the internal combustion engines. So there's the move towards BEV, but the customer market is still with internal combustion engines for all of the well-documented reasons, range anxiety, additional cost involved. So that's an issue. The car companies have all got targets to hit battery electric vehicle production, but they're unable to sell the electric vehicles they're producing. So they're swapping some of their allowances or paying to give their allowances to other companies to get rid of it, which is a scheme the government has allowed to go ahead. So the whole market is slightly disrupted by that. You've then got the introduction of the Chinese car makers coming into the market, also disrupting it from a cost perspective. These companies, whilst producing some pretty good vehicles, are government-backed, government-subsidised in China. And if you take somebody like BYD, Build Your Dreams, they're controlling the whole supply chain. And when I say the whole supply chain, they're mining the cobalt for the lithium batteries, and they've got their own fleet of roll-on, roll-off container ships. So the European market is struggling to keep up with that low-cost model coming into its market with the additional high costs of producing battery electric vehicles. So there's significant challenges. And then just to add one final on, we've got the tariffs as well now, which may be an opportunity because they may disappear in 4 years, but at the moment they're an obstacle for exports, and it's a relatively large part of most of the European car manufacturers' market in the US as well. So it probably makes up 20-30% of their overall turnover. So there are some significant challenges in the sector at the moment.
So, my next question is about the future challenges. Obviously, the current challenges are pretty tight, but, do you see the opportunities and threats for the sector in the next 3 to 5 years all in those, or do you think there'll be outside forces that will come on top of that?
I guess it's a little bit like doing a SWOT analysis where you've almost got the opposite that would be the opportunities. But I think, is there going to be a resurgence in the car sector? I guess possibly as economic certainty starts to come along and people's vehicles start to get older, you then start to see a renewal coming through in that sector. If that sector's able to compete and, I guess, produce better quality cars than the Chinese market, then there's an opportunity in there. I think the governments probably need to have a look at how they support the electric vehicle sector a little bit better. There's a lot of conflicting stuff going on, we're reducing, pedestrianising towns and cities, reducing speed limits to 20 miles an hour in many towns. It's a pretty big sector in the UK. It's probably employing well over 1 million people, I would have said. So it's not a sector that we want to see go to ground. In terms of what will happen in that sector, I guess, I've seen a few disruptors coming in with new modes of transport. So people, without building huge plants, building small plants on the edge of town, making enough buses, trams, lorries to work within, or vehicles to work within that town and deliver into the different locations. I guess, are barriers to trade going to come down in the longer term as we reach these global agreements, which are being driven more seriously by the US approach at the moment to tariffs? And I guess, if we can get that BEV side, that battery electric vehicle side, really motoring along, forgive a pun, you then got a different set of skill sets coming in: dangerous goods, moving lithium batteries around, disposing of lithium batteries. So there's some significant additional, I guess, evolution within the industry that will allow companies to monetize that. Also, you've probably got, when you look at the new set of vehicles coming out, they're moving much more to that 5G technology where they're linked into your house and your personal life and everything else. And if they can get that going, that will change the component setup in the car, which will drive, other inbound supply chains. So there are opportunities. I guess the biggest one is, for me, is when do we come out of this economic downturn? And if we can come out of that and people have got more money in their pockets, they'll buy cars, and that will get the overall sector moving again. Yeah,
you're right. And when confidence comes, we all are more relaxed about spending the money. And also, you mentioned there the Internet of Things with cars, like it is everything else. It's almost merging different parts together. Okay.
Yeah.
And what are people in your sector not talking about that perhaps they should be?
I think there's a number of things that are coming along that are not being spoken around that could add cost. And of course, this is the sort of yin and yang of government versus industry. That legislation continues to evolve and become more tricky and more widespread within sectors. So the biggest thing for me that on the horizon is potentially the European legislation around working time directive for vehicle drivers. So there's a proposition to expand that to light vehicles, to vans next year, which would mean that they would work under the same working time hours as the lorries do at the moment. They'd also be liable to have tachographs in the vehicles, which means that you need more than one driver. You'd only be able to work 8 hours at a time, which will invariably add significant cost into that sector. I mean, even if you think of the parcels delivery market, most of those guys are working 10, 12 hours a day. So you're back into really a shift pattern, which would probably be 4/5, and you're adding another fifth into the workforce. Somebody's got to pay for that at some point. The other thing I concern myself with is that with the matrix management of companies, most companies now split procurement away from operation. And the procurement activity is to drive down cost, which in itself is good practice. But if you commoditize too far and you ruin the quality of service that's coming through that sector, and you ruin investment by companies in that sector, then you put your own supply chains at risk over a period of time. And that concerns me for business as a whole and the service as a whole that people expect to receive. That I often hear people talking about strong partnerships, but I don't see it in action as much as I think it should be. And I think that's a crucial area of how companies work with their transport providers to make sure that they can maintain service, but they can also maintain the transport company's viability to run as a business.
Yeah, no, I agree. And partnership is one of those things, as you say, often talked about, but not always lived, in my opinion. Yeah. But that's just my opinion. And how do you see the green transition impacting your sector, which it must obviously do, and it can potentially change the whole business?
Yeah, look, we've sort of discussed it in various different questions, but it hugely affects the sector. You know, we've got the battery electric vehicle, but then you've got the legislation, people wanting to reduce the CO2 emissions. They want measurement of those CO2 emissions. And ultimately, all of that adds some type of cost into the overall process again. And nobody sees it as a cost-producing exercise. So what I see is, I see everybody saying very, very positive things in public about the need for sustainability. And I think we all agree that we're concerned, you know, with global warming and some of the effects that has. But I don't see that actively being lived in business and people understanding the additional cost of it. So I think that's the crucial thing. You can already see, if you want to buy a petrol vehicle versus a electric battery vehicle, you're going to put your costs up by 20 or 30,000. Now, I don't know at what point you lose your principles and you say, okay, well, I'll just stick with I'll stick and warm up the earth a little bit because I can't afford 20,000 this year. And I don't think there's enough realization of that. That's all. You know, I don't see the incentives for people to go into buying electric vehicles. And if seriously we're all on the same page, then everybody from top to bottom, from government all the way down to the consumer, needs to be aware of the benefits of that, but also needs to feel the benefits. And to feel the benefits when they come to charging, because if you charge at a private site at the moment, it often is more costly than a gallon of fuel. And that's before we go into whether electric vehicles are really sustainable and green or not.
And then you could get into depreciation and all that stuff. I totally agree. You sort of hinted towards this earlier, so I'm looking forward to this. What development in the sector surprised you most in your career?
God, do you know what? I thought, I read your questions last night, actually, and I thought to myself, I'm not sure really, because the sector's always evolving. It's always moving forward. And then I thought, actually, what was the biggest thing that surprised me over the years, or what's the biggest thing that's happened to the sector that is now just normal? And I think for me, it was the move to overnight transportation. You know, we take it for granted now that you can buy a parcel online and it's delivered next day. But, you know, 35 years ago or just over 30 years ago, there was no overnight delivery in the UK. And that to me was the biggest change. And that was a change that was set by TNT at the time, that set them out as the innovators within that sector, put them in as market leaders, and moved the whole sector forward from an inefficient 3-day sort to an overnight sort where nothing laid on the floor in the morning, everything was delivered, to where we are today, where you can order something and it just turns up at 9 o'clock the next morning. You just think that's normal. So that's the biggest change for me that's happened in my career, I think. albeit 30 years ago.
No, but when these changes happen, the disruptors are continually changing every industry, and look what's happening, telecoms and all that sort of stuff. It's amazing. And the final question I'm asking everyone is, if you could speak to the Prime Minister, what would you ask them to do to help your business grow and flourish?
Deliver on your pre-election promises. That's a simple one for me. I mean, we've got to support British manufacturing. We've got to start removing some of the red tape that increases costs and reduces efficiency. And we've got to make our products competitive on the global stage. So yeah, if Mr. Starmer was on the call, deliver on your promises and we'll all be happy.
Good. No, and thanks, because we've had lots of different comments and opinions on that, and it's very interesting to hear those. So thank you for that. And I just want to say thank you very much for your time, Stuart, and give us a good overview of Priority Freight, what you do. It sounds very interesting, and it certainly surprised me, shocked me, the cost of a plant stopping manufacturing. That's an eye-watering number. But just want to say thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners will really enjoy it.
It's a great pleasure, Dave, and always nice to speak to you.
Thanks very much.
Catch you soon.